80 years ago today, on August 9th, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Nagasaki. 3 days earlier, the U.S. had dropped a separate bomb on the city of Hiroshima. These bombs changed the course of history. The two bombs are estimated to have killed roughly 200,000 people in both cities. Half of them died on the first day. Many others died of burns and radiation sickness in the days, the weeks, and the months that followed. The destructive power of this new type of weapon was previously unimaginable, and it changed everything. On August 15th, after facing down a coup attempt by military hardliners who wanted Japan to keep fighting, Emperor Hirohito announced his nation's surrender. Historians to this day debate the necessity of the atomic bombings to end the war, but what's indisputable is the nuclear age to which they gave way. The Manhattan Project, America's effort to develop the atom bomb, had begun in secrecy, but after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, every world power wanted nuclear weapons of their own. During the Cold War, the nuclear arms race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union raised global anxieties as the two superpowers came to the edge of armed conflict. Today, 9 countries possess nuclear weapons: China, France, India, Israel, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Though we've had some close calls, nuclear weapons have not been used again in the 80 years since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The knowledge that nuclear war would result in the complete annihilation of both parties, if not the globe, has served as a major deterrent. But right now, we may also be closer to nuclear conflict than we've been in decades. Russia, a nuclear power, is 3 years into its invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine's resistance has been supported by the NATO military alliance, which includes the nuclear powers, the U.S., the U.K., and France. India and Pakistan, both nuclear powers and longtime enemies, engaged in a brief armed conflict in May. The United States and Israel recently struck Iran over its alleged attempts to achieve nuclear arms. In a brand new book titled The Devil Reached Toward the Sky, an oral history of the making and unleashing of the atomic bomb, the journalist Garrett Graff chronicles the atom bomb's creation and digs into why, 80 years after they were first used, their threat looms overhead more than ever. I want to put this in context because there's a lot of nuclear saber rattling that goes on. Putin has used it a few times since the Ukraine war started. Donald Trump made a reference to nuclear submarines recently. Many people say it's saber rattling, but everybody knows the consequences of actually doing anything with a nuclear weapon. Do you share that view?
I think in many ways, as your intro just laid out, we are closer today to the threat of a nuclear precipice than we have been for much of the 80 years in between. And part of what really worries me in this moment is as we lose the generation of survivors who remember that terrible weapon in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that I think we risk also losing some of the reason that we have held back from using them in the first place. I think we are going to see more countries joining that nuclear club over the next decade. We are seeing new nuclear proliferation conversations take place in the Middle East and in Asia and in Europe. And this is a moment when you look back across the 80 intervening years, I think we have avoided a nuclear conflict in many instances more by luck than by skill.
Interesting point you make about proliferation discussions, because for a lot of the intervening years, we've had non-proliferation discussions. Now the number of nuclear powers in the world, as you say, is more likely to grow than not.
I think it's worth pointing out, a lot of people lose this historical context. The roots of Putin's invasion of Ukraine come from the fact that Ukraine chose voluntarily to give up its nuclear weapons when the Soviet Union collapsed, in exchange for security guarantees that the West has not honored. And so I think that there are a lot of countries that are looking at Ukraine's example and saying the thing that will keep us whole is having a nuclear weapon. And that conversation is taking place against a backdrop where there are rising concerns about the stability of the U.S.'s geopolitical alliances, kicking off conversations in Europe about, can we rely on the nuclear umbrella of the United States? And countries like South Korea, and even in some cases, conversations in Japan, which would be unthinkable even a few years ago. Can we count on the United States to protect us?
Garrett Graff is an old colleague of mine and a great journalist. He's written remarkable, important books about history. And before the break, we were discussing his brand new book that just dropped this week. It's called The Devil Reached Toward the Sky, an oral history of the making and unleashing of the atomic bomb. And a small but important part of the narrative concerns not just the atom bomb itself, but the historic and political path that paved the road to its development. In the early 1930s, Germany was, in addition to being a world leader in the arts and culture and science and all sorts of things, it was among the world's epicenters of nuclear physics. In particular, it was the preeminent place for nuclear physicists, producing prominent scientists like Albert Einstein, Werner Heisenberg, Otto Robert Frisch, and many more. In fact, many of the Americans who would later lead the Manhattan Project, including J. Robert Oppenheimer, went to Germany to study under these experts. It was also during that very same period that the Nazi Party was rising to power. Some, particularly the Jewish scientists like Einstein and Frisch, saw what was coming and fled Germany. But many others in the German intellectual class, physicists and otherwise, believed that things couldn't get so bad and that it couldn't happen there. And we all know how that ended. But would we recognize if it were happening here? I want to put that question to the historian and journalist Garrett Graff, author of the brand new book, The Devil Reached Toward the Sky, an oral history of the making and unleashing of the atom bomb. Garrett, I put that to you because I think it was an important part of history that you were writing, but it also speaks to where we are right now in the world.
Yeah, and I think, as we mark the Nagasaki anniversary today, we so quickly associate the atom bomb with the war in Japan when, as you just laid out, all of its roots really stem from the war in Europe and the rise of Hitler's Third Reich, and particularly the desire of those mostly Jewish refugee scientists fleeing the enveloping cloak of fascism to come to the United States to urge the U.S. to launch its own atomic bomb effort. And I think one of the things that really stands out for me right now in this modern context as we're watching what happens today is the Manhattan Project, left not just the nuclear legacy for the United States, but an important legacy of the way that higher education and science and government can come together as a core source of national strength. And what I really worry about in today's moment is that the Trump administration is sort of systematically dismantling the very model of science that the Manhattan Project and World War II really delivered to us in the partnership between higher education and scientists and researchers, medical labs, and the government. We're watching the decimation of the National Science Foundation, huge cuts to medical research grants, and so on and so forth, huge cutbacks to the very types of immigrant education visas that allowed for the development of projects like the Manhattan Project relying on foreign talent. And this is, I think, in many ways, the model that allowed us to be the economic superpower after World War II and achieve some of these incredible technological breakthroughs of the last 8 decades. And the Trump administration is sort of cutting out the legs of each part of that model, step by step right now.
One of the implications in the book is that if you're an elite in society, and in Germany this was the case, if you were elite, you were a scientist, you were a government minister, you were an artist, you were a doctor, an intellectual, you didn't necessarily think the things that were going wrong could go wrong either to you or could wreck the entire place. And that's the implication, that this might not just be about some NIH funding or some particular project that's going on. The implications could be much, much broader. There was nobody in 1930 who thought that by 1945 Germany would be a destroyed country.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, the chapter in this book that I found most haunting is the passages of the scientists watching what is unfolding across the 1930s And, watching their colleagues sort of all say versions of, I just never really thought Hitler would do all of the things that he said that he would. I only joined the Nazi Party because it was going to be good for my career. I didn't really believe in all of the stuff that Hitler wanted to do. And you sort of watch the way that those core institutions crumbled, but more than that, gave Hitler permission to move forward with his plans by sort of stepping aside and making accommodations that allowed him to bring fascism to Germany, and in doing so lead the country into a world war that devastated the country. Further down the road already in the United States than it would be to easily stop this. But I think you look back and you see the same parallels in the Republican Party's accommodations to Donald Trump. You've seen voters say, I just didn't think Donald Trump would do any of the things that he actually said that he would. And I think, to me, the lesson is always you have to draw the line early, and you have to enforce the lines hard. And that's something that we have not watched the United States do particularly well over the last decade. And what I really worry about, and I've sort of written about, is what saves the world in World War II is the United States riding to the rescue with projects like the Manhattan Project and the incredible industrial might and military force that we are able to bring to bear against the Axis powers. And if fascism takes hold here, if authoritarianism takes hold here, it's not clear to me who the rescue force ends up being.
Right. Garrett, it's a great book. Thank you for being with us, and thanks for the conversation. Garrett Graff is the author of the brand new book, The Devil Reached Toward the Sky, an oral history of the making and unleashing of the atomic bomb.